just try to, we have about 45 minutes, so what I will do, I was prepared to talk about Sergei only, and I will have to ask the others to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their experiences in an autonomous way. So, starting with you first, I have a question for you. Do you know how many human beings are on Earth? Roughly. A good answer, 7.4 billion. Do you know how many astronauts have flown in space so far? Wow, you're well prepared. Wikipedia says 550. It's a fraction of citizens in the world, but they are citizens in the world as well. They're a little bit special, they will never admit it, but the proof is that today you're very, very numerous to listen to them, so it's a special occasion and we want to take advantage of it. And amongst them, I would say there's some who are a bit more special, let me say that. In particular, Sergei. He's too shy and too modest to say that, but he has, for instance, he is number 2 in the world for length of staying in space, and he has been the first one who has had a very varied experience. He's been in Mir, he's been on the space shuttle, he's been in International Space Station, he's done it all. I'm pretty sure that Sergei and his colleagues will be signing for going to Mars if you had the opportunity. Huh? If you have good rocket. I'll let you explain what a good rocket is in a while. So, and of course we have again here a very good example of international cooperation. Being in space, we don't see I didn't go to space. I only happened to see when he was launched, and but being in space, they tell us that they don't see any borders, any frontiers, and that is the best sign that international cooperation in space works, and you are the best sign that international cooperation in space works. I don't want to steal more of the time of our special guests here. I will leave the floor directly to Sergei, who tells us a little bit about his experience. And then I don't start with ladies first, I just go in, I'm not politically correct, I'm sorry. And then we go into this order, and then the floor will be to you for questions and answers. Thank you. Sergei.
It's on. Раз, два. Работает? Yep. So it was already said that I have experience of 6 flights. I was very lucky to be on most of these flights is kind of international missions, because my first flight was with a French cosmonaut, and we flew together to Mir, stayed together for almost a month, and then we continue with my partner's long duration mission. My second flight was actually 2 missions in one flight, when Expedition 9 and Expedition 10 was combined together, and I was staying in space for more than 10 months. It was a very interesting mission. It was also international. We start our flight with British cosmonauts. Then in middle of the flight, Austrian and Kazakh cosmonaut came to us, and then when just before my return back, German cosmonaut came to the station, and we worked together, did all experiments, and then returned back to Earth together. My third flight was very interesting also because on very high level decisions were made to bring our programs together, because after Soyuz Apollo, I don't know if I see this mostly a young audience, but in 1975 we had a very interesting mission when 2 vehicles were docked together, and the American and Russian cosmonauts are working together in space. So after a long period of time, decisions were made to bring our programs together again, and I was chosen to fly as the first Russian on shuttle. American astronaut Norm Thagard flew on Russian Mir space station, and that actually was beginning of a big joint program that called Shuttle Mir, and then NASA Mir. So several American astronauts were flying to Mir station, and that was actually beginning of our job for International Space Station. Then I was lucky again to be selected as crew member for Expedition 1, and actually before a long duration flight on Expedition 1 I flew with again on shuttle as a first assembly mission when after launching first element of station from Baikonur, almost immediately after another piece of station, the node, was launched from Cape Canaveral, and I was part of this crew when we docked these two pieces together and started to work together as joint crew. Then, as I said, it was Expedition 1, and then my sixth flight was Expedition 11, already a little more than 10 years ago. And for 10 years it was a record for total time in space, and just recently Gennady Padalka overcome this total time, so he is #1 now in space. So I'm happy that this line of moving frontier forward is continuing.
So thank you, Sergey. In a nutshell, 6 space flights, 803 days, 9 hours and 39 minutes in space. And he, from the very beginning, he said that already, is very used to fly international. He flew with French, with Italians as well, with Helen Sharman, and so since the very beginning, he is one of the champions of international cooperation, of course. And so now it's your turn. I'm afraid I have nothing prepared for you, so you introduce yourself and tell us your story.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sandra Magnus. I'm a former NASA astronaut. I joined the astronaut corps in 1996. And the whole arc of my career at NASA was about the International Space Station. Once I got out of basic training, I actually supported Sergey and Expedition 1 as they were preparing during their very long training flow, 4 years, for space station. So I have a lot of time working in Russia. I also worked with the Japanese and the Europeans and the Canadians as we were preparing to get the space station launched and operated, spending some time also in mission control in Houston during the very first years of space station operation, again, supporting Expedition 1 and Expedition 2. I flew in space 3 times, nowhere near what Sergey has done, but it was still very fun. I flew on STS-112, which was an assembly mission, part of the S1. We took the S1 truss up. I had a long duration mission of 4.5 months for Expedition 18 in the 2008-2009 timeframe, part of the last 3-person crew as we prepared the station to receive 6 crew members as live there today. My very last mission was 5 years ago on STS-135, the last shuttle mission, and I left the office in 2012. It was a wonderful career. Working in the international environment is incredibly rewarding, and it shows you what we can do when we all work together. The station program, I think, is a testament to that. So I'm going to hand the mic off to Oleg.
Hello everyone, I'm Oleg Kotov, former Russian cosmonaut, flew 3 times, all 3 times to the International Space Station and spending a total 1.5 years in space. So as well, I was selected in 1996 and just retired this year. And currently, I'm head of Human Space Flight Center in Russian CNIMASH. It's some scientist institute. I performed 6 spacewalks, so that's it.
It's very good. So as you can see, we have a very good selection of experienced men and women. And I would say that we start with opening up for question and answers. And I would invite all of you to raise your hands. There's some colleagues with green shirts who will hand you the microphone. Don't be shy. Don't think you cannot speak English. We all speak very bad English with certain exceptions. So speak up, ask your questions, and they will certainly have all the answers for you. I see a hand over there. Is there a walking microphone available for this gentleman in the middle? And then there's here's one of our volunteers coming over. Introduce yourself, please, and say whether you're a student, whether you work, what you do in your life.
My name is Thomas Schumann. I'm from the Danish Broadcasting Corporation with the media. So my question is, what are your thoughts on private companies entering the launch vehicle market and launching astronauts into space?
So it's interesting that we're at this point in history where after 50 years of governments launching people into space, acquiring the knowledge to do that, technology evolving, and there are people who have understanding of the risks that they can establish a business case, even though those are a little curious, that we've reached the point where entities other than governments are interested in engaging in space. I think it's a good thing. I think it shows as a community that we're making progress, because ideally we're going into space so that more people can go into space eventually. I think change is hard. I think we're all going to learn a lot, but I think overall it's a healthy sign of the advancement of our community.
And I will probably add that actually nothing unusual happens, because this is a path we are going for many, many years. It just now people start to talk about a little more, but if you look back in the history, in the beginning, only government, basically, both in the US and Russia, started to do all work with rockets, with launches, with space flights, and in the beginning everything was done by government. Then many years ago, private companies start to use in space industry start to produce small pieces, and then pieces became bigger and bigger, and just recently it became like whole vehicle. But for a long period of time already, we see this path where more and more private industry became part of the program. And it actually means that we start to understand it better, because again, looking back in the history, when we have a lot of uncertainty, we don't know how to do this, how much it costs, only government can do this kind of job. And if we understand system more, if we can predict the business basically, then private companies start to get engaged. So we just again, it's not revolutionary, it's evolutionary when we go from total control of everything by the government to mixture of private and government industry.
Okay. Other questions? I see. Yeah, go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, I'm Derek Stamos from NASASpaceflight.com. Here at the IAC this year, there have been two major Mars exploration programs that were both outlined by private companies, to tag on to the earlier question. Lockheed Martin's Mars Base Camp and Elon Musk's Mars colonization program. Can you say anything specific on, did you see those presentations, and what did you think of the technologies that were outlined?
No, I can start. I saw Elon Musk presentation, and it's very interesting. It still looks for many people as a science fiction, because the scale of study is not what we used to do in space environment. We usually send limited amount of people. We work hard to make system very reliable. And what I saw in Elon Musk presentation is that he's going to send a lot of people into space, and before we can do this reliably, it's still a long way we need to go.
I'll just add, I think it's actually very exciting. If you step back and look at the big picture, it's very exciting that so many different members of our community are focused on Mars, and focused on Mars in a thoughtful way, where they're starting to think of missions and they're starting to think of technology. And it's not just one or two voices. Now there's a plethora, a multiple of voices that are aiming at Mars. And I think that's very good, because that'll generate the momentum that will help us get there. But it's going to take the whole international community to do it. It's not going to be possible for just one company or even one country, because it's difficult and it's hard, and we still have things to learn. So I think having a vision and getting people excited about a vision is very, very powerful and positive.
Other questions? Okay, there's two hands raised here in row 3, I think. Yes, right here. Raise your hand. There's a young lady here who raised her hand first, and then we switch over here. Another young lady.
Hi, I'm Maria. I'm a young graduate trainee at ESA, and I would like to know what is the best part of every mission when you fly to space. So it's like the launch, or when the first get out of from the ISS?
It's very difficult to answer this question because each stage of a mission, starting with when you are assigned to a mission, you're selected to fly when you first time meet your crewmate, and by the end of mission, which ends when you landed and on Earth, and you understand that's over. So I can't say which one is more interesting or more exciting.
Okay, we take this other young lady here, and then we go over to that gentleman right there. Go ahead.
My name is Yanya, I'm from Iteso, and my question is, how difficult was to adapt to the space and then to adapt again to Earth, and why?
Can you repeat, please? Yeah. So.
How difficult was to adapt to space and then to adapt to Earth again?
So I think your question was, what is it like to go into space and adapt, and then come back and adapt to the gravity again? Okay, you're probably the best one to answer that since you've done it so many times. I've noticed that my body gets used to it every time, so perhaps you can.
And actually, adaptation in every flight, you have to adapt to weightlessness, and this is not very simple because we cannot make model of weightlessness on the ground. We can do neutral buoyancy training for EVA. We do very short introduction in weightlessness flying parabolic flights, but really long-term weightlessness is very unusual for human body, and it's physiological and also psychological adaptation. That's what you need. I agree with Sandy that you remember this adaptation, and when you flew second time, third time, you adapt to weightlessness much faster. And that actually the same happened with readaptation to the ground, because I remember after my first flight, it was very unusual feeling because you used to feel yourself strong all your life, and then suddenly you are fighting with gravity, and it's very unusual feeling. But then you learning what kind of exercise you need to do, or what kind of emphasis you need to do in space. And actually my feeling that readaptation after second and subsequent flights were easier than after first flight. And actually I think Oleg, because his background education is medical, so he may add something about this.
Yeah, it's in general, Sergei is absolutely right, saying that adaptation to this microgravity is very not easy, but it's finally, when you already adapted, you pass adaptation, you really feel it's great flying in weightlessness. So living in space, it's really awesome. But after days in space comes to end, you should be ready to returning to Earth. And every astronaut and cosmonaut aboard the station spending about 2 hours daily for physical training. It's like a gym. So we're running, we're cycling, we're weightlifting, and the only one purpose to keep our body health in a good shape and getting the body ready for returning to Earth. And when returning back, it's really, you can feel way out even your heart, even your fingers, arms, everything is very heavy. And my first imagination was, okay, how the people could live here in this condition? It's really something. But after a couple of days, okay, life gets better. Okay.
Thank you. Well, we had lined up one gentleman here, a very young, passionate here. Remember to introduce yourself and state whether you're student, press, or passionate for space.
Good morning, and thank you for finding time to So my name is Artem Anisimov. I am a space lawyer. I'm born and raised in Belarus, live and work in Silicon Valley. And the question that I'm asking, you probably heard many times, but every time I see a cosmonaut or astronaut, I feel compelled. So does the overview effect really exist? And the reason I'm asking is I talked to some astronauts who say it's a nonsense and like a PR stunt, and that there is nothing from it. So has the view of the Earth changed for you?
So we probably all three should answer this, I think. But
Please.
Yes, it does. When you are outside the planet, like we are in space, and you look down on the planet, you see it differently. For example, I describe it for the engineers in the room. You see it as a closed system. It's a spaceship. Everything on it, just like in our station, everything on the station affects everything else on the station. So everything on the Earth affects everything else on the Earth. So you don't see it as a bunch of disparate entities. You see it as one system. And I think it profoundly changes your perception of what the Earth is. And by the way, it looks very fragile on top of that. So I believe, that this is what's described as the overview effect, this idea that when astronauts go into space, we have a different perception of the Earth, and we see it as kind of one entity. And so I think we all should answer that, but definitely it exists.
And what was already said, that we don't see any borders from space, and that was actually one of my first confusion, I would say, because every time you look at the map on the ground, when you prepare how to find some object on the ground, every time on every map you have boundaries, and really you are using these boundaries as landmarks. You used to know that this specific city is somewhere in the corner between two borders, something like that. And when you're in space, you see no borders. You see mountains, you see rivers, lakes, but there is no borders. And exactly what Sandy said, that everything is influencing everything. So if you see huge plume of pollutions, it goes across the borders with the wind from one region, from one area to another. And people sometimes don't appreciate how fragile it is, because again, being on altitude 400 kilometers, looking down on the Earth, and especially looking at the horizon, you see how thin the layer of atmosphere that's covering us. And I remember looking down on this layer of clouds, and especially with low sun, you can see sometimes that clouds and the shadows, they're a little separate. So you're understanding that really all our lives is happening between these two layers, between bottom of the clouds and the surface. So really we became, we start to have some kind of global view.
Okay, so the volunteers, look at me. I have lined up already 6 questions. We start with this very, very young man here. Then we go over to first row. We had 2 questions there. Then there's number 4 somewhere in 4th row there. Then back number 6 and 5, sorry, and 6 somewhere on the right side. So starting with you, say your name, please.
My name is Yitzhak, and I wanted to ask, what was the most exciting thing you saw while you were in space?
I already answered.
I think the most exciting thing I saw was one day going over Central America, there was a volcano erupting, and I could see the plume of smoke from the volcano trailing over the ocean. It was really fascinating. I'd never seen anything like that before. And really, every time you look out the window, there's something very exciting to see. I don't know if you have a moment.
I remember my first flight and first orbit, actually, in space, and we keep turning 16 orbits per day, but I remember first glance outside the capsule, and I was surprised to see curved horizon, because theoretically all of us know about it, but really in all your life before, even flying on high altitude airplane, you never see this curved horizon. And in space it's obviously curved, and you can realize that our globe is big, but it's still not so big.
Yeah, just saying, because it's not exciting, but I was surprised how thin is our atmosphere. Because you take a look from the space on Earth, you see that's our air, our atmosphere is thin. You can imagine how it's thin. It's saying, yeah, this is only what protect us from the space, and keep our alive. So let's really start thinking about how to keep it in good shape, our air, our atmosphere.
Okay, so we come back first row here. I have two hands raised. Raise your hands again in first row, otherwise yep, okay, here you go. You got the mic.
Hello, привет. My name is Christian Lazer. I'm IAC alumni and satellite engineer at Airbus Defense and Space in Germany. I was curious actually for the future planetary astronauts for Moon or Mars. Does it take to have more skills or to be more well prepared academically or professionally in order to be selected to go for Moon or for Mars? Thank you.
This is a very good question because the crew selection and crew training depends on the task what the crew is supposed to perform on the surface of the Moon or Mars. So if, I expect that the first mission will be like short duration missions and just build like a frontier somewhere on the surface of Moon, for example, if we're talking about the Moon. And later on, I guess, it's my personal guess, we will need to select our specialist and very narrow specialist in geology or monology, okay, saying, and maybe physics, astrophysics, to work on a moon station, if we have moon station as like a science. And we need engineers to keep our tools and robotics in good shape. So probably we'll have different approach for crew selection, crew training in future. But for the first stage, we'll keep the old way, say.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that you have to be able to learn and you have to love to learn, because we learn so many different things than we ever imagined that we would have to learn. And that trend, I think, will continue. You have to you're constantly learning when you're training for space and you're actually in space and you're doing work.
And maybe I'll add a little bit that for future missions, I wouldn't say even for any serious difference with cosmonauts, but for future missions we have to be smarter planning this, because if you're flying low Earth orbit, you can get much more help from the ground. Ground can talk to you easier. They can send spare parts if needed to repair something. But for future missions like Moon base, Mars base, crew have to be more self-sufficient. And I think something is going to be easier, something is going to be more difficult, because living on the surface and have at least some gravity is an advantage. It's disadvantage from one point of view, but it's advantage from another point of view, because many life support system, I would say, is going to be simpler, because to make Earth water management in weightlessness and in a gravity is different, and it's easier with a gravity. But something is going to be more difficult, because I said you cannot rely on the ground as much as being closer to Earth.
Was there another question in standby in row 1? Otherwise, I go to, yes, you, row 4, raise your hands, and then back in row 15 over there. So this gentleman in row 4 somewhere, raise your hands very high, and then I have to go back to row further down, and then I come back. Yes, I saw you.
Even with all the emotional state control training you guys go through, did you guys have any hard times remaining in control of some specific situations?
Can you clarify a little more? What do you mean?
Either with excitement or in some complicated situations where you let any kind of emotions take over or start to take over. Did you experience any situations like that?
So I think you're asking is while we're in space, regardless of all the training we get, do we find ourselves reacting emotionally to situations? Is that your question? Okay, so first of all, we're very good at compartmentalizing. So we can think about many different things at one time and put them in little boxes in our mind. Do we have joy and fun in space? Yes. Do we have situations where we let fear take over and drive our actions? No, because that's counterproductive, and we're trained very well not to let that happen. So are we emotionless robots? No. We're very human while we're on station, but we're there to do a job, and we're very well trained to do the job, and we enjoy it. We get frustrated sometimes, because sometimes the ground will ask you to do something, and you just go, really? You want me to do what? But you do it because it's your job. It's just like any other job in that sense. So does that answer your question? Okay, I don't know. Yeah.
Good. I think it's a young lady. Raise your hand there. Otherwise, the colleague in green shirt cannot see you.
Okay. I would like to know, first of all, if you have children, family, as a woman and as a man, and what's the experience when you come back to Earth? And sometimes I know there's this kind of natural fear when you go there and say, okay, there could happen a problem or whatever, and that's the last time I see my family or stuff like that. And, how's that?
Okay. All right, so I'll start. I do not have a family, but it's more by choice, not because I could not. There are a lot of women astronauts who have families. I think the hardest thing on the families is watching us go, because they do not have control of the situation. We as astronauts and cosmonauts have made the choice to fly in space. We understand the risks, and we're okay with that because this is fun for us. But for our families who have to watch us go do it, it's very hard. I remember it was always difficult to watch my colleagues launch into space, but when I was launching into space, it was just a lot of fun. And so there's a lot of, it's a big difference between you being in control of the decision and the people around you having to deal with the consequences of your decision. But we have on Space Station many ways to stay in touch with our families, so I never really felt isolated from my family.
And actually it's different from my first flights and my most recent flights, because initially communication links was much more limited than now. We had opportunity for our families to come to mission control basically once a week and have talk to us, and sometimes we have video telecon. But now it's much easier because you can actually through IP phone go and call your friends, your family, and you feel much more connected now than it was before. Saying about children, I have one daughter and she's grown up now, but I remember when she was young and when I flew my first flights. At first, for small kids, when she was 2, I was spending almost a year outside. So I remember when I returned back, it took some time for her to get accustomed to me again, to recognize me again, because for small kids this time is very significant. And secondly, my surprise was that we used to work in different areas before we became cosmonauts. For her, all her life I was cosmonaut, so it was natural for her to have father as a cosmonaut.
Okay, I had 2 lined up, one at the very back on the right side, and then I come in the middle. Raise your hand at the very end on the right side. Then there was someone else in the middle here, we'll see, and then I go back on the other side. We only have 5 minutes left, so.
Hello, my name is Tendama Dima. I'm from Africa, in South Africa. I just want to know, what do you attribute the 550 figure of current astronauts is it because of the impact of financial burden, or is it anything to do with seclusion? Secondly, how do you impart the knowledge that you do have to other continents which are disadvantaged? And lastly, what do you think are the risk factors connected to you going into orbit or space? Because what I read from the book, Return to Earth from Mars, from the Moon by Colonel Edwin Aldrin, he says there are some strange objects and flashes that you see as you are looking across the window. Could you just give us a brief indication? Thanks.
Okay, so that was a lot. I think probably what we'll do is address one, and it's, I think, the risk factors of going into space and how those risk factors may change as we go to Mars. So I think that's a really good thing to talk about because there's a lot of discussion of sending humans beyond. So the risk factors, of course, are the same in launching from the planet, and we'll just get better and better at that as we gain more knowledge. I think radiation is probably the biggest risk factor. Oleg, you're a medical doctor. You could probably talk about the risk of radiation better than Sergei or I. So.
But again, this radiation is, yes, it's a huge risk, but it's not the only risk we have during the space flights. And again, living in weightlessness is risks by itself because our body is not designed, saying in engineering style, it's not designed to live in space, really. So we can do something to protect any side effects, but again, we can't do it in 100%. And think about the risk factor flying in space, everything. It's psychological risk, medical risk, engineering risk. It's a risky job in general.
Talking about risk, I would say that, of course, doing something new is risky. And newer thing you do, it's obviously more risky, but that's the way our program is built, that we have to keep this risk under control. So we know that we never let people go somewhere if risk is above a certain level. So that's why before we do something new, we do testing on the ground, we do testing in flight, in unmanned flight, or that's why actually we are flying to space as professional cosmonauts, because at this point risk of space flight is still higher than acceptable risk for average people.
Okay, we take one question. It's too many anyway. We only have 3 minutes. There's a very long-standing request. Yes, go ahead. I think it's a lady. It's a young girl.
Yeah, sorry.
Or maybe not. I can't see you, but go ahead.
My name is Saul, and I'm a student of physics. And actually, my question is, how did you get there? Or actually, what did you have to do to get there? Talking about what did you study for that, or what are the opportunities that the students have?
So I think everyone have a little different way to become an astronaut, because everyone have a little different background in education and different life story, but looking in average, I would say that majority of people who become an astronaut, they got very good education. They were able to save your health status sufficient for such a challenging job as being astronaut, and majority of astronauts, cosmonauts came with a technical background or scientific background.
Medical.
I think that, go ahead, you want to complete?
Or medical.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Sure. We have time for one last question, and we have a promise to this lady right here. Yes, she is standing and she's praying. You get the mic.
Thank you. My name is Perla. I'm from Guadalajara. Thank you so much for being here. My question is, what kind of experiments did you do on the International Space Station, if you did any, and what did you discover or learn at space, scientifically speaking?
We could spend days answering that question. Yeah, just the list, let alone the results. I'll mention a few of my favorite, and perhaps Oleg and Sergey will as well. I participated in a nutrition experiment as a subject where we were studying the biochemistry and nutritional change that happens in human beings in space, and I thought that was an outstanding study. I believe it's still ongoing. I'm not sure. I've been gone for 5 years. But I thought that was an outstanding study because we're still trying to understand how the human body changes in microgravity. And the more we learn in space, the more knowledge we gain for how to help people on Earth. So that was one of my favorite studies. But we do studies in everything. Perhaps, Sergey, you can mention your favorite one.
Well, in different flights were different experiments, but my favorite experiment was mostly technical experiments, because we are learning how to build things in space, how to get new materials in space. Of course, all of us are doing a big wide range of experiments in life science. Honestly, it's not my favorite, but we do it a lot. Maybe Oleg have a little different perspective on it.
Yeah, usually, we performed hundreds of experiments. For example, every flight I took participation about 50, 60 experiments. So that's difficult to find this. Yeah, this is my favorite. Okay, but surprisingly, I really prefer to have biological and life science experiments. And for example, during my last mission, I worked a lot with experiment about our eyes, about the vision, about how our brain work out information from eyes, how we can build the how we understand what's around us, because imagination is a little different on Earth and space. So it was interesting. Yeah.
Okay, so time flies, and it flies even faster when you talk to very interesting people. I wish you to give them a very big applause, to thank them for sharing their time with us. And we thank you for being so numerous at this event, and thanks to the IAC for offering us this opportunity in Guadalajara. Hasta luego.